My son-in-law told a city clerk I was mixing up paperwork because I was retired. I did not argue with him. I only asked for the original application. That was when the red final note showed my lake house tied to his unpaid business fees. Then the clerk turned to the signature page, and the room went quiet. If you believe older people deserve to be heard before someone calls them confused, stay with me for this one. My name is Miranda Reed. I am 68 years old. I live outside Bemidji, Minnesota, and I spent most of my working life as a municipal records clerk. I knew permit forms, signatures, filing dates, and public records the way some people know recipes by heart. That morning, the lake sat gray and quiet behind the house, but I barely noticed it. I carried the envelope inside, set it on my kitchen counter beside my coffee mug, and read the notice again under the little yellow light above the sink. Harbor Line Renovations LLC had unpaid permit fees, and the city of Bemidji had printed my lake house address as the business location. My phone buzzed before I could sit down. Kyle Whitaker's name lit up the screen, and that alone told me he already knew the notice had arrived. I answered and said his name once. He did not ask how I was. He said I needed not to act dramatic because it was just paperwork and he had it handled. I looked at the red stamp again, then at my own name typed under responsible property owner. Kyle, I said, why is my house on your business notice? He gave a small laugh. Not a happy one, more like the kind a man gives when he wants you to feel silly for asking a fair question. You're retired, Miranda, he said. Let people who still understand business handle the paperwork. I stood there with the phone to my ear and let the words settle. Then I took a blue pen from the drawer, circled my name on the notice, and laid the pen beside the paper. I did not trust myself to answer right away, and at my age, I have learned that silence can keep you from handing the wrong person more ammunition. A minute later, the phone buzzed again. Kyle had sent a photo of a correction form with a yellow arrow pointing at the signature line. His text said I only needed to sign it and he would fix everything. I stared at that yellow arrow a long time. Then I turned the phone face down on the counter. Allison is my only daughter. After my husband, Warren, passed, she worried about me being alone at the lake house. Kyle seemed helpful then. He fixed the loose porch step, replaced 2 boards on the dock, and once drove me to First North Bank when my old pickup would not start. So when he asked if a few deliveries could come to my place while his rented shop was being repaired, I said yes. They were small boxes at first. A hinge set, a coil of weather stripping, a carton with Harbor Line printed on the side. I wrote the arrival dates on a notepad because old habits stay in your fingers even after retirement. Then he started calling my lake house our family place. He said it one Sunday at dinner while cutting into a chicken pot pie I had made from scratch. I corrected him gently and said it was my place, and Allison looked down at her plate as if the peas had become very interesting. A week later, she stood in my kitchen with her coat still on and told me Kyle thought I should not worry about forms anymore. Mom, she said, he just means you have done enough of that for one lifetime. I smiled because I did not want to quarrel with my daughter over a sentence she was repeating from her husband. But the porch light flickered in the window behind her, and for the first time, my own kitchen felt a little less mine. The envelopes kept coming. I stacked them in a drawer, each one dated in the corner. One from a supplier, one from a permit office, one with Harbor Line Renovations LLC printed in heavy black letters, like the company had always belonged at my address. When I asked Kyle, he brushed it off. It's just a mailing address, Miranda. Don't make it bigger than it is. Would you have let that go, or would you have started keeping every envelope too? I called the city of Bemidji and asked about the final notice. The clerk told me I could come in and request the original application. Before I could leave, Kyle called again and said he and Allison would meet me there, just to explain things faster. That was when my stomach settled, Kyle was not coming to explain anything. He was coming to steer the room. At City Hall, the hallway smelled like floor wax and old paper. I stood at the counter with the notice folded in my purse while Marcy Bell, the clerk on duty, typed Harborline's name into her computer. Kyle came in with Allison a few minutes later, smiling like a man arriving to fix a problem he had created. Marcy's printer started clicking. She picked up the first page, then the second, and her eyes paused in a way I knew too well from my years behind a records desk. "Mrs. Reed," she said carefully, "you may want to see the signature page." Before I could reach for it, Kyle stepped closer. "Marcy," he said, "Miranda gets nervous with forms now. She has been mixing up paperwork since she retired." He said it gently, which somehow made it worse. Allison stood beside him with one hand on her purse strap. She looked at me, then at Kyle, then down at the brown tile floor. His words stung, but her silence stayed with me longer. Dan Rusk, the code officer, came out from the back carrying a thin folder. He nodded to me, then looked at Kyle. "The unpaid permit fees are tied to the business application on file," he said. "We need clarification on authorization for the property address." Kyle reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded form. "That is exactly why we are here," he said. "Miranda approved temporary business use. She just needs to sign this correction, and we can all stop wasting city time." He slid the paper toward me with 2 fingers. The page stopped just short of my hand. I looked at the signature line. Then I looked at Marcy. "I would like a printed copy of the original application and the signature page, please." Kyle laughed softly through his nose. "See, this is what I mean. She does not understand that the correction is the simple way to fix it." I turned toward him. "Kyle," I said, "I spent 30 years watching people regret signing simple fixes they did not read." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Marcy set the printed pages on the counter and turned them so they faced me. The application listed Harborline Renovations LLC in bold letters. Under business operating address, there it was, my lake house address, printed neat and official. Beneath that, the page named me as the responsible property owner for unpaid permit fees and possible property action if the account remained unresolved. Possible property action. I read those 3 words twice. This was not misplaced envelope. This touched my home, my money, my reputation, and my right to decide what happened under my own roof. I folded the pages carefully and put them in my purse. Kyle's face tightened. "Miranda, don't make this adversarial." I looked at Allison. She still would not meet my eyes. I left City Hall without another word. Outside, the air had that late spring dampness that comes off the lake and settles into your sleeves. I sat in my old pickup with the door closed, the city notice on the passenger seat, the red final Nowhere stamp staring up at me. My hands were steady, but I rested them on the steering wheel anyway. Kyle had not only talked over me, he had put my house where his bills were. After a while, I opened the copied application again. The signature page was last. The name Miranda Reed sat on the line in blue ink, shaped enough like mine to fool someone moving fast. But I was not moving fast. For decades, I had ended my signature with a sharp upward hook on the final D. Warren used to tease me that it looked like I was trying to catch a fish with my name. That hook was missing. The last stroke sagged flat, like whoever copied it knew the letters but not the hand. Behind the application was an attached utility verification for the lake house. I remembered an odd line on my utility bill from weeks earlier, the one that said commercial inquiry. I had set it aside because the bill was paid and the porch light still came on at dusk. Now it made sense. Kyle had been preparing this before I ever opened that mailbox. I drove home instead of calling him. I wanted an explanation, or maybe I wanted an apology. I hated how much I still wanted one honest apology, but people who misuse paper do not confess because you ask nicely. I had learned that from years behind a records counter. The lake house looked small when I pulled into the driveway. The dock boards Kyle's had replaced were turning silver in the weather. Warren and I had chosen that place because it was quiet, because the kitchen window faced the water, because I could drink coffee in the morning without hearing traffic. Now my home had been turned into a prop for a business that was not mine. I put the city packet in a manila folder, wrote the date on the tab, and drove to First North Bank. Paula Greer worked there, and she had known me since the days when she filed zoning payments at City Hall with a toddler on her hip. She saw the folder in my hand and led me to her desk. "I cannot discuss another customer's account," she said softly after reading the first page. "But if your address or signature was used without permission, you should request a fraud review in writing." I slid the page with the phrase supporting bank verifications across her desk. Her eyes paused on it, just like Marcy's had. Paula lowered her voice. "City filings sometimes get attached to credit applications, especially for small business lines." My purse sat in my lap, heavy with paper. I asked her what I needed next. She tapped the folder once with her pen. "Before that hearing, Miranda, you need to know what was attached to that credit inquiry. If your name is on it, you have a right to challenge it." Paula called the next morning and asked if I could come by before the bank opened. Her voice was careful, and careful voices make me listen. I drove there with the city packet on the passenger seat and caught my coffee untouched in the cup holder. She met me at a side desk near the safe deposit rooms. A manila envelope lay flat in front of her. She kept one hand on it, like she wished she did not have to show it to me. "I cannot give you another customer's private records," she said, "but I can show you the documents where your property and signature appear." Inside was a copy of an occupancy affidavit. My lake house address was typed under primary business operating location. Beside, it was a small color photo of my dock, the same dock Warren and I had stained one July afternoon when we were still young enough to think sore knees were temporary. At the bottom was my copied signature. It looked like the one from the city form, close enough for a careless eye, wrong enough for mine. No sharp hook at the end. No pressure mark after the second E in Reed, where my hand always pressed a little harder. Paula tapped a line near the top. Harborline was seeking a small business credit line. The application referenced active permits, a fixed operating address, and supporting city filings. A thin invoice copy from North Pine Supply sat in the packet. It was marked past due in red. Paula did not say Kyle was drowning in supplier debt, but the paper did not need help talking. I folded my hands in my lap because they wanted to shake. Kyle had not used my address for convenience. He had used my home to make his business look stable enough to borrow against. That afternoon, he called while I sat at my kitchen table with both folders open. His voice had softened, and that softness made me trust him less. "Miranda," he said, "I was helping you turn that old place into something useful." I looked out at the lake. The water was bright and flat, and two gulls stood on the dock as if nothing in the world had changed. "Useful to whom, Kyle?" I asked. He went quiet for half a breath. Then he started talking about family, property value, paperwork, and how Allison had enough stress without me making everything worse. I let him finish. Then I told him I would see him at the hearing. The hearing room at Bemidji City Hall was small, with beige walls and stackable chairs that scraped whenever someone shifted. Marcy sat near the front with a file folder. Dan stood by the wall with his code office tablet, and Paula sat 2 seats away from me with the bank envelope in her lap. Allison came in with Kyle. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, and one hand stayed wrapped around the strap of her purse. Kyle looked confident until he saw Paula, and then his smile thinned. Marcy opened the meeting by naming Harborline Renovations, LLC, and the unpaid permit fees. Kyle leaned forward first, using that contractor voice he saved for customers. He said this was a misunderstanding, that I had agreed to let him use the address temporarily, and that I had gotten overwhelmed by the forms. I placed the city notice on the table. The red final notar stamp faced the room. Marcy, I said, would you read the line under responsible property owner? She glanced at me, then down at the page. Miranda Reed. She read Lake House address on Birch Point Road. Kyle lifted one hand. That was a filing mistake. We were helping family. Miranda knows that. I turned to him. Then you won't mind if the clerk reads exactly whose name you used. The room went quiet. Even the supplier representative in the back stopped tapping his folder against his knee. Paula stood next. She did not make a speech. She placed the occupancy affidavit on the table and pointed to the typed line naming my lake house as Harbor Line's primary operating location, then to the copied signature and the photo of my dock attached to the credit inquiry. Marcy checked her file. We have no notarized consent from Mrs. Reed, she said. Dan looked at Kyle. If the business address was submitted without authorization, the unpaid permit fees cannot be attached to her property while the filing is under review. Kyle opened his mouth. Nothing came out that helped him. Allison stared at the photo of my dock, then at the signature. She looked at Kyle and asked, "Did you put Mom's house on that bank paper too?" Kyle reached toward her arm. She moved her chair back before he touched her. "That was not a paperwork mistake," she said. I remember the sound of that chair scraping back. It was small. It sounded like something ending. The consequences came in plain office language, which was worse for Kyle than shouting would have been. The city suspended Harbor Line's license until he paid the fees and filed corrected paperwork. The bank opened a fraud review. The supplier claims stayed with Kyle's company, not my lake house. That same week, I changed my mailing authorization. I put a locking mailbox at the end of the drive and kept the key on a ring by the kitchen sink. I also wrote one rule in clear ink and gave copies to Allison and Kyle. No one would use my address, my property, or my name without notarized written permission. Allison did not leave him that day. Life is rarely that clean. But she opened a separate bank account, moved temporarily into a small apartment near the school where she worked, and began looking at her own finances without Kyle standing over her shoulder. I told her I would help her rebuild. I also told her I would not help Kyle hide debt, explain away lies, or turn my home into a shield for his pride. A few weeks later, Allison came by with blueberry muffins in a paper box from the bakery in town. We sat on my porch with coffee while Lake Bemidji caught the morning light. She apologized once, quietly, and I did not make her repeat it. We did not pretend everything was fixed. Some hurts do not disappear just because the truth finally shows up. These days I keep the mailbox locked. The folder stays in my kitchen drawer. I do not like that I need those things, but I sleep better knowing they are there. When my daughter reached over and squeezed my hand, I knew the house was mine again, and so was my voice. If this story stayed with you, stay with the channel for more stories about dignity, family, and starting over.